All right. I thought I would discuss my philosophy for why capitalism is good, but a few details that maybe the left talks about but doesn't know how to actually realistically implement um, that are good. So, I previously mentioned that the people that feel like they're losing out from women having higher standards of who they're going to date or marry, rather, and have children with. In regards to the attempt to shift societal norms to benefit oneself when one is weaker than their competition. I left a bit of a cliffhanger when I mentioned also that they succeed initially and then it collapses and the woman go full hypergamous and so on. Um, but it is what it is. Now, capitalism or the an allowance of people to maximize their own well-being with minimum interference from larger corporate or governmental bodies is a fundamental principle of free markets and conservatism and Christianity and so on. The goal is that if you allow people to do this stuff in their own interest, they'll make good decisions towards that end. And the general principle also is that if people are free, then they're more likely to decide on their own to help other people out. Whereas if people are stressing and constantly dominated by some outside force, they're going to be railroaded into coping mechanisms that are maybe unhealthy and so on. You see this in the right's approach to not liking big government or mega corporations. You see this in the left's approach to not liking God or the police. The question is not a matter of whether it exists or not, but what degree and ordering placement number on the list of these things you have, and in what kinds of primary situations relating to those things. And the guiding principles behind what you think that thing is of governmental regulation of business, policing of criminals in the general population, and God's control over the world and us. The majority population, when things are good, probably is anti-government but pro-God and pro-police. And there is actually a reason for this that's good, and I'm pro-conservative on this. Which is, if you have Christian police officers and they're really Christian, then they're going to be very allergic to abusing their positions of power and authority and so on. Because Christianity is not just a moral code, it's a relationship with God who treats you how you treat other people. Hence the whole love God with your heart, mind, body, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? So like the question of who will watch the watchers, and the answer is God. And some people don't find that a very convincing argument. But even then, they can acknowledge at times that other people can believe that realistically. And I guess some people will think religiosity is just a fraud or a scam or a hoax or something, and nobody believes it for real and so on. But if you believe that people can genuinely believe in religion, the question you might want to ask, instead of how stupid are they, is what effects does this have on their character based on the religion? Right? Like, not just who is religious, but what direction is the religion tugging on relative to who they are as a person, individually? Their temperament, their disposition, their personality, their life experience. How is it contextualizing these things and so on? You know, how is it guiding how is it a guidebook to life and so on? You know, and the truth is, the left likes to bash religion because it's not the left's code of behavior. But the left's code of behavior was only actually popped up because of the progress derived from Christianity. Same with liberalism. There's a metaphysical world order to these things that only works in a Christian context. And that's one of the reasons why communism is sometimes called a Christian heresy. And liberalism is first emergent in a specifically Anglo-Saxon and then Christian framework, and so on. And this has something to say about more homogeneous societies and so on, more homogeneous than heterogeneous. Because England and Britain and Wales and Ireland and Scotland were very homogenous. They were not entirely, but they were mostly by like 19 to 1 ratio, basically. And as per my abstracted tribes thing and so on, this might be the best incarnation of how to manage a society or a country or a civilization in existence from the various Anglo communities to some extent, but they've gone in a certain communistic direction lately that is very unhealthy, whereas before it was relatively stable, and that's mass immigration's fault, really. The colonization of the West by the Third World and so on. It's not normal. It's not common. It's not good. It's not usual. It's a new development that is really unwelcome for the majority of the population in the West. This is, again, not to say that I'm against mixed marriages or mixed races or something like that to some extent. I believe it's actually important to have that a little bit. But the amount I'm relatively conservative about. Um, you know, like if there's like five people in your country that share genetics with another country, and yours at the same time, then you have like a diplomacy um, element going on with people with shared interests between the two groups and so on. But if you have too many of one people in an area, then they start to turn that area into their old place through their customs, cultures, policies, politics, faith, and social norms and etiquette and metaphysical beliefs consistent with that primary civilization, and so on, consistent with their own primary civilization, not the native and homeland civilization, the host civilization. So you don't actually want colonization and mass immigration. Um, so then the question is, with all these weak men who are not being miscarriaged, what do we do with them? They're obviously less fit for purpose than the Giga Chads, but we don't want to just start culling people and so on. And one of the approaches I've taken to resolving this issue is twofold. One is we used to have a reasonably rigorous education on being a man and the personal development required for that, and norms and stuff like that. And we need to kind of rebuild the mechanisms for that. And some of that does mean men's spaces and women's spaces where the opposite sex, and that means if you're a trans woman, you don't get into the woman's space in this case. You develop amongst your peers in the gender relations. So that there's men's and women's spaces where they can just be themselves as men or women. And that means feminism, red pill, MGTOW, and WIGTOW or FIGTOW. That is men or women or females going their own way, is unhealthy. Feminism and red pill are what FIGTOW or WIGTOW is to MGTOW. It's just two different degrees of the same general attitude and principle, and so on. And really, one of the things I believe is that for the men, and this is going to, there's approximately a 105% or 105 to every 100 women born of men. 105 men born to every 100 women on average in a society. So that means on average there's more men born than women. And that's with the miscarriages of weak male embryos. So There's always going to be men without women and women without men, but it's going to be a lot more men without women than women without men. It's easier for a woman to get a man than a man to get a woman. And it's literally supply and demand dynamics here, and so on. And this is also one of the reasons why I believe men are the selection mechanism for humanity's genetics, more or less, and women are more the stable factor. So, what do we do about it? Well, there's two things we can do. One is we reestablish monogamy and marriage for children's sake so that the women aren't so hypergamous. And two is we don't just roll over and give in to uh, the spiteful mutation of our people. The making of spiteful mutants out of our people. We educate and train the men to be as strong mentally, emotionally, physically as they can be, and morally have a moral spine and ethical codes, and foster their development into technical competence at various things, and a little bit of awareness of how women think, while also saying, no, you are not a woman, you are a man, act like it, and if you're acting like it properly, you'll get a woman. And also, so that means mentoring and developing the assets of other men, especially younger generations and so on. It means like a very hands-on effort by the men to train the boys. And that is actually really normal in society. We've allowed that to slacken because of television and the internet and iPhones and so on. But that is the fundamental way to keep civilization going. Because, like I said, there might be more women valuable in positions of work than before, relative to the men's value in being in that position, not just through sheer skill, but also the lack of pregnancy leave and the tendency to be able to take care of the job without worrying about the children because the woman's got it more often or is better suited towards that. So it's about efficient and effective utility, utilizing the strengths of various people effectively as women or as men, and working on the abilities of a greater portion of the people in being middle managers or upper managers or something like that, or like team leaders or something. Maybe, maybe not even. Maybe we just need to return specifically to the masculinity and patriarchy. Let the cream float and let the stones sink. Maybe that'll handle it automatically, mostly pretty good. while still allowing for this particular principle that I elaborated that sounds kind of leftist when I think about it. Um, it just automatically is taken care of because people want merit and so on. And, if you do it and you commit to it, you might find some racial differences. You might actually have some. And if you don't automatically cry racism and that everyone needs to be exactly the same, you might find out that there's actually different tasks in society that different races can do better than the other races. And it might not be total leadership or total, like it might not be a general or a private in the army kind of thing necessarily. Um, but it might be in that direction slightly. So one has to accept that it might be a possibility. That this is a real, valid meritocracy that's unequal in the execution amongst races and sexes and so on. Um, the goal is to gravitate towards a stable, prosperous society. And if some people can benefit less, that might be okay. The argument from Christian conservative capitalists is that while some benefit more than others from freedom and free markets and so on, there is a mechanism through Christianity for the charities and the lending a hand up and those kinds of things. So it's not just like a rat race, every man for himself, and it's not just like put those under you further under your boot like the conservative hardcore anti-crime thing is, supposedly, according to leftists. It's a balancing act of three primary things. Which is provide, capitalism, protect, conservatism, and take care of your people, which is Christianity. Or take care of, provide and protect for those who are not genetically related to you, but part of your civilization somehow and so on. And like I said, there's a bit of a meta going on where, if you're related to someone who's related to me, then I might care for you because while you and I are not related, we're related to someone we both are related to. And have a expanding network logic through that principle, and we just have to biologically evolve to that point. But eugenics is a dead end, and Frankenstein's, and we don't know what we're doing with genetics and all the complicated interlocking systems that interplay and affect each other back and forth, and so on. So we shouldn't necessarily rely on playing around with that like we're gods. Which literally just means we might have to have a relatively one-way system, or we have to stop developing civilization as fast necessarily, and I don't mean force civilization to recede or go to the Stone Age or go back in time or anything like that. I just mean sort of like, instead of making like mind bending breakthroughs on the elite science fronts all the time, and then not like maintaining civilization's social developments at all. What I mean is, we might have to focus like 90% on rebuilding our social mechanisms and like 10% on technological development. And I don't mean welfare and communism and high taxation and income redistribution and so on. Uh, the other reason why men are better than women is literally they're much more physiologically suited towards the task than the women are, for various mechanisms and so on. The men are the tool users and the technological innovators and the social, the principles of society um, developing capable than women are, much more often. The women can are the stable influence of the human element, and the women keep the rapid mutation men, I think. I don't actually know. I've never looked this up, but I'm suspecting the Y chromosome mutates faster than the X chromosome on average in humans. The women are the um, gatekeepers of evolutionary fitness in the men. Um, now, I do believe that a monk is better than MGTOW or feminism or red pill or FIGTOW or WIGTOW or whatever you want to call them. And there are more men than women, which is why I mentioned the whole like monk thing, because that's traditionally a masculine thing. Um, Adopting a little bit of a monk aspect in your life in relation to God and so on. If you're serving God and cultivating yourself, and you're sworn off having a relationship or children or something, um, you're going to find peace of mind relatively. You might not understand it completely. You might not get the heights of theological depth and wisdom or whatever you want to call it. But like you'll get somewhere really good compared to if you're just a bitter hedonist who's chasing the next hit and is envious and jealous and angry at the world and so on. The thing with your walk with God is He's going to possibly alleviate that or scour it out of you, depending on how He approaches you. And it's based on kind of your what's healthy for you, based on your personality and your development and so on. Some people He's a little harder on. Some people He's really like really um, gentle touch. God is with people. However, the bonus is, even if you go through a bit of a monkish phase, you don't have to commit to being a genuine monk. If you go through a bit of a phase in cultivating yourself and developing this relationship with God and so on. People are not oh, wow, I just forgot what I was going to say. People are not... Oh, right. There is no disagreement that there are people in the middle of history. The only question is whether there's a person at the beginning and end of it as well. And that person would be God. So if you can keep that possibility into account and you start acting on it in some ways, I think actually you're often going to find that you're much more likely to actually grow and develop and mold into someone that can keep a woman for the long term. Um, and actually attract women as a general, like, charisma thing. Um, a man who bows to God can be inspired through the promise of glory and future good things. If it's a good enough vision of what you want out of God to follow Him, and whether you trust in His promises that He'll take care of you, to risk amazing things, great deeds. And that's one way to attract a woman, you know. And the thing is, it also doubles as cultivation of your general day-to-day aspects in a way that will attract women as well. And that's one of the reasons why the Old and New Testament are both aspects. So people say gentle Jesus, meek and mild, despite the fact he's got some anger in him over blasphemy, basically, in the temple with the money changers. Um, he's a very strong individual in a way, but at the same time, he's relatively pacifistic. And the Old Testament is kind of like the conservative side of things, not the liberal side of things in a way. Classical liberal, not modern liberal. Of the relationship with God. And you're supposed to incorporate both aspects in it, um, and not ignore just one or the other side of things. That's why they say to pay attention to the whole Bible and don't change or take out or add anything to it, because it's a very solid all-around thing for when it was made, and it's relevant to this day on some levels, because it's a sort of perennial or ever coming back kind of set of wisdoms for maximizing society's well-being and people's well-being and so on. Now, the promise of God's glory after death is a very enticing thing if you believe it. What I will say is that you kind of abstract the principles some eventually, that there's probably something out there that has some qualities of God somehow. And then it's really up to you to believe whether or not that person or entity or will or whatever can ever make itself known in a odd and janky way, or if it's something you have to pierce into analysis and details, orientation, and principles and theories based solely on general principles of existence and your relationship with that. That is the miracles or signs from God versus the just look at the world, it's so complicated, that's why God exists approach in relation to having faith. It can be both. But one could suggest that, generally speaking, people that get signs from God or whatever, if they exist, I believe they do. I believe I've gotten them. Who they're for. And the answer is those who can't come to the position of God's existence and general principles that are good for living without those signs and jank and sort of like peekaboo from beyond the veil from God directly. Um, that's the way I've experienced it. Um, so yeah. So I don't begrudge people believing in God because they. I don't begrudge people who don't believe in God, even though I believe He exists. Because I distinctly remember what it was like to not see God and like be like, oh well, I've had some weird things that predict the future at times, but I've never seen anything to indicate a personal will behind it. I just thought it was like quantum tunneling or quantum entanglement or something like that. I didn't have that personal knowledge, personal will or knowledge of my personhood dimension to it. I thought it was just like my brain was like quantum entangled with like 20 years in the future or something. Like I don't know. Uh, you know, But I did get some weird stuff that spooked me out that suggests a person behind the power of quantum entanglement or quantum tunneling or whatever you want to call these things. Quantum magic is what I used to call it. There is a personal will behind it, as far as I can tell. Um, so there is a sort of argument if you can, and the thing is, some people will get these experiences and just like shrug them off. But the thing is, there is actually a reasonable number of people that have had kind of experiences like this in some fashion or another. It's not necessarily clear cut exactly what's going on. But I suggest this is the case on these particular things and so on. My general rule is that these kinds of things are not necessarily to get people to do specific things like a sort of the fairy Navi in Ocarina of Time Zelda going, hey, listen, watch out, hey. It's more like a sort of like peekaboo, I exist, by the way, kind of nudge, wink, um, thing from God. Yeah. Because I believe that if you accept this premise, then you can kind of go to the Bible and be like, okay, well, this is what the other people that have had these experiences much more strongly than average people that get these ones um, kind of figured out about the relationship with said God and so on. And those are what prophets are basically. So I differentiate a prophet as someone who generally has a lot of interactions with God through signs, whereas I believe there's a significant group of people worldwide that have had some sort of a small number of experiences with God um, that kind of nudged them in the general belief or direction of belief. Um, and the non-prophets are the ones that kind of don't need to be guided further more directly. They're good to go. They can figure it out on their own with this established principle that they suddenly gained from it, and so on. Or they're not called towards something that is like requires God's special touch to delicately develop for whatever reason God's got for that. But if you can believe in God and you do believe in God and you develop yourself and you follow and you follow In my experience, if you follow in my experience the Christian God, as someone that believes they get science from God, I have found the Christian experience to be quite enlightening and edifying and fairly morally solid. There's a bit of gentleness to it. There's a strong arm behind it too. If the going gets tough, but there's a gentle touch on most of the things for developing a high trust society in the first place, which is where all the social developments really that the left likes emerge from. So if you sabotage it, if you're too open, your heart, if you're too bleeding heart, your heart you bleed out. There's a mistake. If you're too open minded, your brain falls out. There's a mistake. But like they say, it's good to have a soft heart, but not so soft you bleed out. And it's good to have an open mind, but not so open your brain falls out. You know. And I'll end with one sort of thing. Way back in 2005 or 2006, I was on the vanilla World of Warcraft forums arguing very strongly the case for paladins specifically to get a efficient and effective damage dealing capacity that is fun and engaging with some off healing true to their nature, that the game developers of the World of Warcraft classes have been using more since about 2018 or so. And they've refined the class mechanics quite heavily in accordance with our suggestions from back in 2005 and 6, or 2004, 2005, 2006. If I remember correctly, a lot of the modern class mechanics that they suggest that they're doing now were originally suggested. Even some of the names of some of them were like ripped from the old forums of the classes of World of Warcraft. Now, the general trend of all these suggestions that existed was that people wanted to maximize the utility and enjoyment of each specialization as a bit of a niche, but also having some general principles that are good in most situations, even if they're not the peak ideal. So that way there's some reason to include people that are different classes because they are unique in their strengths, but there's some degree of capacity to be valuable in a position even if you're not the peak of it. And this was represented by the pure classes and the hybrid classes. Now the paladins and warriors are notable because one of the things that happened is the game EverQuest made paladins basically just as good as warriors at everything and then gave them cleric spells on top of it. And that really upset the original developers of World of Warcraft, who kind of kept paladins weak at damage to justify having warriors as damage dealers. And the game wasn't very clear up until the last 5 levels out of 60 levels who would be good at end game or late game stuff and what they'd be good at. So the paladins were kind of a powerhouse from level 1 to 55 that could do a bit of everything basically. And then they became only good at healing for the high-end gameplay. And I didn't like that. It wasn't that I didn't want to heal. It wasn't that I didn't want to support. It's that I wanted to be able to hit stuff and occasionally heal. I didn't necessarily want to do the highest damage. I didn't want to be super, like, Mary Sue as a paladin. I just wanted to hit stuff and occasionally heal as my utility, and lose like 10 to 15% damage compared to the warriors, let's say. You know, so like 20% of the healing of a regular healer and 85% of the damage a warrior does, or something like that. So there'd be a reason to carry a paladin that makes it easier on the healers by a fair margin, maybe 25% of the healing even. But like whatever. I don't know the exact numbers. But you know what I mean. Like sort of like there's something about them that's slightly extra on the whole. But like there's a one area that they're not the peak at, so maybe someone else would be better in that position if you just wanted that one thing. And also the versatility. So like if you were to if you needed healing more so in a fight on a raid boss or something, you could switch as a paladin, attack paladin to healing more often when the abilities are when you can choose between healing and damage. Or like if a fight requires a little bit more damage, you focus on the damage when you can choose between healing or damage. A little bit of a shift, but still not as good as the pure class in that one specific thing. So there's a bit of group versatility, load bearing by the individual character of that particular hybrid class. And the example that I want to give now is that Dragonflight introduced evokers, and they have a skill, 3 trees. They have a damage tree, a healing tree through spell damage and spell healing, and they have a tree that can heal or do damage a little bit, but built into the basic system is that of providing a buff towards healing, damage, or tanks, damage takers, soakers. Based on who you're applying the buff to, that is relatively powerful and so on, and that some of their utility is that they can go on the fly at any on a whim who they're going to increase the power of, the damage, the tank, or the healing. And it's baked into the system of the augmentation, specialization, evoker. But it's a one target thing, so you're not like buffing the entire raid and then like that's all you're doing for like 30 minutes. You're like, it's actually part of like your spell damage or spell healing rotation mechanically, so it's baked into the system for the evoker. It's relatively natural to do. And I don't think it can be used on yourself, or like if you can use it on yourself, it's like half as effective or something. So it's not like you want to use it on yourself. But you can I don't know if you can if you don't have anyone else, but You know, I guess it's kind of like one of those things where you're halfway between healing and damage with spells. So like the buff on another person is like actually kind of like you're maximizing your power in that domain kind of thing. And shamans are kind of a more aggressive version of the paladin in terms of the buffs they can provide, um, historically speaking. Um, so the World of Warcraft people have been baking the mechanics into the classes and the specializations to give them a strength of some sort unique to that class and specialization for the role, damage, tank, or healing that specialization can actually do, basically. Um, and what that means is if you're picking a hybrid class, you're sacrificing your primary role's effectiveness for a slightly greater boost in some sort of alternative role. Um, and you're playing off the core strengths of the pure classes. So you can in fact use the hybrid classes for everything, or you can pick the roles. You can use them as shoring up a secondary role, um, roles members in a 40-man raid or something, or a 25-man raid, while still providing a suitable and acceptable performance in the primary role of that specialization. And it's good to see. It's really great to see it. Now, for the purposes of society, the reason why I'm bringing this story up, even though it's kind of like weird and autistic and detailed, is basically my entire stance, which is why I'm happy with the current class developments of World of Warcraft, is that I've always wanted to maximize the utility and enjoyment and the finding a higher purpose and what you're willing to delay gratification for or suffer for and so on, and something so good you're willing to suffer for it, and something that tickles your mind or your fancy or something like that, that is um, not just not more complicated, not more complex entirely, but like legitimately one of those higher values or something, you know. Um, Something that sees you in a role, like a certain type of job or something, where you're useful from a merit-based approach, but you're also enjoying yourself and you're being rewarded, so you have progression that is more suited towards your temperament and disposition and personality and so on, than alternatives, with a higher goal of maximizing societal well-being and having fun experiences. Um, that is my ultimate purpose, basically, on this earth is to see how to get people to do the work themselves to maximize their and others' well being. I participated in doing it directly myself a little bit, but I'm not naturally a very big doer of things. I'm more of a thinker or a talker about ideas. Um, I'll give one more example of my gameplay kind of thing, and you can see how this is kind of one of those things that led to me being socialist at first when I thought it was a good idea. And you can see how I'm coloring my um, lack of. I mean, I can spurg out and say I hate the left and stuff like that, and I do that. But like I recognize there's a purpose to them existing, and it's not just for themselves. It's like actually something valuable to other people a little bit. I just don't think it's in quite the way they think it is. But I'll give you another example of my sort of bro socialism, gamer bro socialism mindset that kicked me off basically in the first place. Actually, I'll give two examples. They're really quick ones this time. The first one is I used to play a medic that could drop medic packs that anyone could use in Return to Castle Wolfenstein. And I got so good at the game that basically I started dropping medical packs on the enemies, and then like if they shot me, if they tried killing me, I'd stab them to death in the game, and then like drop medical packs for the people that didn't attack me and so on, or like if they came back and didn't shoot me this time, then I'd just drop them a medical pack. To give the other side a chance to win because my side was always winning. And like I would time it so there's like 5 or 10 minutes left, and then I would like go try hard mode to win the game basically, sort of like forcing a challenge on my team basically, because I didn't like steamrolling. And the idea was to keep people into the game, and maybe there's a winner and a loser, but it's a good game all around. To maximize competition, while not nerfing people. Now, the third example is that I play Left 4 Dead 2 and Vermintide 2. And the thing about me is, I don't really tend to pick the I mean, I've got a few core choices in Vermintide 2, but the way that I play is typically I'm guarding the other players. And what I mean by that is, if a player can handle something, I let them handle it. If there's something that might overwhelm them, I intervene and deal with, or help them deal with. So, for instance, Kruber's Knight, I will charge much more often to stun a horde of enemies around an ally, or a big enemy that's stomping an ally, or something like that. I don't do it necessarily to stun the enemy so it makes it easier for me to kill. Yeah, I will play the elf when she's in her first class specialization with the guided arrows, triple shot, magic arrows, headshot sort of thing. That's good for sniping the special enemies, the specialist enemies, like the globe thrower or rattling gunner or blight stormer or whatever, or leech. Um, but that's when I decide my specific class purpose is to hunt those specials down. And I usually pick the short bow for that, and the twin swords or the twin daggers or the glaive. And if you notice, except for the glaive, there's a trend where it's much better against lots of little enemies. And the glaive is kind of that direction for a heavy weapon, anyways. Is more in that direction than the typical heavy weapons are, the armor-piercing weapons. The other thing I'll do is I pick this up where the spear and shield maiden combination with the stamina recharge or extra stamina or whatever you want to call that stuff, stamina saving stuff, leads me to being a very prolific shover of enemies. And the primary attack of the Shield Maiden is essentially slice, shove, slice, shove, slice, shove. Because the first attack with the spear is not a stab, it's a slice. So I'm performing the task of crowd control and keeping my allies safe by stunning the enemy with area effect to reduce the horde sizes and so on. And of course, as all weapons do, the power attack is the armor-piercing attack. Not that the spear is very good with it, maybe, but it's doable. And if you've cleared the room of the hordes and mobs of vermin, the Skaven or the chaos cultists or hordes or whatever, then your allies can power attack the elites reasonably easily. And in Left 4 Dead 2, what I typically do is I shoot things that approach my allies from behind them or beside them when they're reloading or when they're not paying attention in that direction and so on. It means I get less kills, but it means that people are working together and being protected for the majority of the period of time, so everyone gets through the games really easily. And I let other people rack up the kills in 360 no scope and all that, but I just provide the overwatch basically and pick off the particularly problem enemies and so on. And one of the things I found is with the tank, which is the Rat Ogre in Vermintide 2 or the Chaos Spawn or Minotaur in Vermintide 2. With the tank, I do what I normally don't do, which is switch to my primary weapon. So with everything else, I usually dual-wield pistols, regular pistols, or I use the Desert Eagle or Magnum or whatever you want to call the one-shot regular zombies pistol is with 8 bullets. Or I pick a melee weapon, which means I'm not worried about like friendly fire and like I rush ahead and slice enemies and so on. With the tank, I will switch to typically a machine gun of some sort and just hold down the fire button on the tank because it's not hard to hit them. It's really easy to just hit them and not miss them. And even with all the recoil and spastic jerking of the bullets around the aiming reticle. And with the tank, it's the one time that I basically spray bullets and don't bother aiming. And with everything else, it's being very careful not to hit my allies, but to hit whatever's troubling them from behind or the sides when they're reloading or not paying attention to that direction. So that's how I approach my video games. And you can see kind of the principle behind what I'm getting at for the society. And You can see how it's kind of masculine in a way, because it still requires a certain degree of skill and awareness and competency and so on. But you notice how I'm basically kind of playing the team dad game mechanics wise, or the Overwatch, which is when a sniper is making sure no one sneaks up on the guys he's watching over, or like pops the head off someone sneaking up on the guys he's watching over. Basically, just making sure no one gets the jump on his allies. You can see how this is a particularly masculine sort of approach to being a supporter individual generally. So a very lot other people do the majority of the work and just contribute at the exact right moment necessary for the exact right thing to make sure they can continue doing what they're normally doing. And what I found is this is a very powerful method, because if you can do it, then you can substitute raw physical capabilities, substitute for raw physical capabilities. And this is partly what it means to work smarter, not harder. And it's also kind of a leadership kind of position. And it's why I like cooperative games, because it lets me do this responsible leadership kind of methodology in a way that is reasonably accessible to me, because I know how to aim and shoot and run and gun and jump and duck and reload and the weapon selection for different situations and so on. But I'm also 7 years rusty on video games. Now I'm getting my skills back relatively quickly, because it's honestly been like 10 days of playing Left 4 Dead 2, and the itch to play video games is like returned after like 3 years of playing 30 minutes of video games a day, or a week, sorry. But this is going to be a functional strategy, even if I'm never that good ever again. And I was literally so good at Return to Castle Wolfenstein that I was like the top 20% of like any given game for like a year or two. So like even in my advanced age with a little bit of drift and dwindling of raw capability physically for like fast aiming and stuff like that, and quick reaction time and so on, this strategy actually enables me to be useful even with diminished physical capacity. And that's one of the reasons why age is a leadership position and veterancy is so important in leading people doing things similar to what you were doing earlier. And the thing is, you gradually grow your technical competence, and it's sort of like, imagine in Fallout if like when you're 20, you're 10s all across the special, and then like when you're 40, you've got, and let's say you're like 50 skill in each thing, and so on, just to simplify it. When you're 40, you're going to be like 100 skill in each thing, but your raw stats are going to be like 80 or 8 or 7 in the special category. You know what I mean? And that's kind of why leadership is so important. So yeah. And that's a relatively good leadership principle. Now the thing is, if someone sat me down and asked me to plan out a system for other people to follow to maximize their potential, that would be under the skills section. And what that means is the difference between wisdom and intelligence. Intelligence is your ability to incorporate and digest new data as a raw physical phenomena or psychological phenomena. But wisdom is knowing where to put it. So you need to be intelligent to be wise, but just because you're intelligent doesn't mean you're wise. And the thing is, it gets complicated in a way because basically a lot of people who are not so intelligent are actually kind of wise because they have a rough foundation of where the basics go, even if they're not high definition. That's one of the reasons why you shouldn't look down on the simple folk, even if you're like 30 points of IQ above them, which is 2 standard deviations, and genius is like 3 above regular, 100. So genius is like 150. But yeah. At some point, wisdom outdoes intelligence on the same tasks. But anyways, that's one of the reasons why older people tend to be the leaders and so on. And why fathers are so important, and why also another reason why men tend to be older than women is because they're supposed to be the leaders, so they're supposed to have more of a grasp of the general rough terrain of being an adult and so on. And it's literally that simple. It's so strong a principle of the difference between wisdom and intelligence that it's biologically baked into the fact that men tend to be a bit older than women that they marry. It's not a definite thing. It's not 100%. There's going to be outliers. But that's the general rule of why it's that way. So yeah, I'll leave it there. But that's basically my gamer bro socialism stance. I guess it's not necessarily socialism, but it's kind of like, it's kind of that thing that I think everyone kind of wants, but they don't know how to like formulate exactly how to get to it. So there's a left and right divide based on the plan versus evolve initial stance that people take on these things.